There's a point in nearly every entrepreneurial journey where success begins to feel more like a trap. The business is growing, revenue is up, clients keep coming, and yet you're working longer hours, carrying more responsibility, and wondering how a business you built for freedom slowly became dependent on you for everything. My guest today understands that moment very well. Welcome, or hopefully welcome back to The Reluctant Entrepreneur. I'm your host, Mike Conrad. Joe Patneaude is an executive and business coach who works with business owners and leaders who've reached a growth ceiling, not because they lack ambition, but because the way the business is structured no longer scales. Sound familiar? Joe spent decades in leadership and financial services before shifting into coaching, where he now helps entrepreneurs move from being the engine of the business to becoming the leader of it. Joe spent decades in leadership and financial services before shifting into coaching, where he now helps entrepreneurs move from being the engine of the business to becoming the leader of it. In this episode, we talk about the hard transition from operator to leader, why more hustle rarely fixes growth problems, and how entrepreneurs can scale without burning out or breaking their teams. We also dig into Joe's STAR, S-T-A-R framework for scalable growth and what it really takes to build a business that doesn't rely on the founder to survive. If you've ever felt like your business can't run without you and you're not sure that's a good thing, this conversation is for you. My conversation with Joe Patneaude begins right now. Stick around. Hey, Joe, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're my guest today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So am I, Mike. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, Joe, let's get back in the Wayback Machine, go back in time a little bit. Before we talk about coaching and frameworks, take us back. What did your early career look like, and what first drew you toward leadership and business growth?
Well, going back that far, we're going to pretend it was just recently, but it's longer ago than any of us want to admit. But
yeah, I know the feeling.
I was right. Exactly. I actually, I didn't grow up in a white collar family. Despite the career I have now, I actually grew up in a very blue collar family, raised by people who grew up as farmers and were now, doing blue collar jobs like mechanics and working in factories and things. And that's what I did after high school. In fact, my first job I really built on my own, first company was a landscaping company. And I had that, I sold that, and immediately went into working for somebody else. Went to work, realized that for one, it just wasn't me, but two, I really wanted something more. I didn't want to be taking orders. I didn't necessarily want to be giving them, but I wanted to be helping people get to another level, like what I was doing. So I threw caution to the wind, moved to an entirely new state with no job, and took a job in the mailroom of a financial services company, and spent the next several years doing every job that scared me. So no college degree or anything.
Intentionally. Wow.
Yep. I literally would go in and say, hey, what can I do? I've mastered what you asked me to do. What can I do next? And the short version of the story there is within 10 years, I was actually in my first senior leadership role. I had gone through supervision and management, and then within 10 years had my first director level role, and I was director of technology at a broker dealer in the Tampa Bay area. And then I spent the next 15 years after that in multiple leadership roles, C-suite roles, and even took 2 breaks from my career to go out and start other businesses that I scaled and sold before returning back to where I am now.
So you spent many years in established organizations, starting from the proverbial mailroom. That seems to be like the Hollywood version. Someone starts in the mailroom and then, 20 years later, they're the CEO, right? But at what point did you realize that path no longer aligned with who you were becoming? Because clearly you have entrepreneurial blood in running through your veins, whether you knew it at the time or not. Anyone who works for a company and says, I want another challenge, certainly has that entrepreneurial mindset. At what point did that cause you to actually act on it? Was there a defining moment? Was there a conversation or a situation that you just said, okay, I'm out. I'm going to do this myself?
So there's obviously a few key moments that jump out, and one I'll talk about here in just a second was very pivotal. But really, Mike, just leading up to it in general, and that drive to want more. Listen, some people are going to come out with some noble, grand reason as to what motivated them to want to be in leadership. I'll be perfectly blunt with you and your audience. I wanted more than what I had. And not just financially, obviously that was part of it,
Sure.
but I just wanted more. Like that's all I cared about was there were so many different ways I wanted more. And really in that first leadership role that I had with another firm, that director of tech role, what happened was that was one of those big pivotal moments where I said, I need to start changing who I am and how I lead. I realized that I was working for a firm that didn't align with me and my business ethics. Not to speak bad about anybody, but I didn't like a lot of the things I was seeing going on at the firm and the way that they were treating their customers and the contractors that worked with the firm and that kind of thing. And about 2 years in, I had that realization of I can stay here, be comfortable, and I was making good money. And, I liked a lot of the people I worked with, but I couldn't sleep at night. Right. So at what point do you have to be able to sleep at night? And I said, well, wait a minute. Why do I have to do this somebody else's way? I can go out and do this on my own. I have the basic skills and whatnot. So I stepped away and I threw caution to the wind. And that's when I started my first financial practice and my first real estate business. Both was at that moment. I just walked away and said, you know what? I have to accept the fact that my value system is more important to me than the money and the prestige.
It's funny. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who say that, one of the reasons, sometimes it's the main reason, but certainly one of the reasons to start their own business is for the money. And I kind of laugh when I hear that because that was not my primary motivation. My journey was a little bit different. I created a product for the electronics manufacturing industry that I thought was a game changer. It solved a very specific, very real issue our industry was facing, and I couldn't get anyone to build it. I couldn't get anyone to do it, particularly my current employer, which was an equipment manufacturer. And I felt so strongly about the product, I thought, well, the only way to do it is just do it myself, right? And in the back of my mind, I'm like, and it'd be probably pretty cool to own my own company. I mean, the money will be great. I can just write myself checks. I can take time off. I can go around the world on vacations. I can buy things and charge it to the company. I can do all these things. And with the exception of the latter, because the latter will get you in trouble, the money and the time freedom was the last benefit. It was years, probably well over a decade or two before I realized that, right? So for people who are sitting on the fence thinking about starting a company, thinking about money is the primary, motivator to do it, have a plan B. It's like all these people that want to grow up to be, rock stars or actors or something. It's like, go to college, get a degree, have something to fall back on, because 98%, well, statistically, 80% of all startup businesses ultimately fail. So, and during the time they fail, there is no money. That's part of the reason they fail. So I just kind of laugh at that romanticized view of entrepreneurship. It's not what Hollywood might portray it as. It's gritty and it's hard and it's rewarding and it does bring those things eventually, but everything else has to be fixed first. You got to jump through a lot of hoops before you can even get to that point. Many entrepreneurs chase freedom, as we just talked about, but growth often brings more responsibility, frequently chiseling away at that freedom. When did you personally feel that tension show up between growth and freedom, or at least what you thought freedom was at the time?
So for me, it really was more relevant in early leadership in other companies, because by the time I went out into the entrepreneurship, I had already sort of learned the hard way on a few things because I was taking on leadership roles and I fell into the same problem that a lot of entrepreneurs do, which is I had this feeling of I'm in charge, I'm responsible. If anybody fails on the team, it's my fault. So I was doing it all and I was becoming the bottleneck and I wasn't empowering anybody else to do anything. I really sort of trained my staff that, if you don't want to do it or if it's hard, just say you can't do it. Joe's going to take over. And then next thing you know, Joe's working 70, 80 hours a week, which was not what he wanted
and
to do.
They're all going home at 5:00, right?
Yeah. They go home at 5 and I'm like, okay, great. Now I can start my work now that they're gone. And so fortunately for me, I had that experience and had to already learn that shift between being the operator and moving into being the architect to make sure that the processes and the support systems were in place for the team and to make sure that the processes were there for the actual workflow as well. So when I went out into business, I sort of had maybe a little bit of an unfair advantage in knowing that I had to set my businesses up that way right from the start. So the minute I knew that there was going to be a workflow and I was going to bring in support, I had to design that before there was a need. And so just give you a quick example, like when I started one of the companies that I own now, it's an education company. I knew that I couldn't do it forever by myself. I knew that I was going to have to bring in other educators. I was going to have to bring in another support team. So when I sat down and designed the company and the way the workflow was going to go, I didn't design it for me. I designed it for a full staff, even though at first I was the only person doing it all. And by having that there, when the time came, I knew not only what position to hire for and what the responsibilities were going to be, but what values I wanted to look for in the person I was trying to hire. And then I was comfortable right away with delegating and making sure they understood the process. So it kind of gave me an unfair advantage, but it's one thing I tell people all the time, entrepreneurs that are starting their business, plan your business for what you want it to become, not for what it is day one.
That's great advice. It's like you created an org chart and then temporarily put yourself in every box. And eventually, over time, started taking yourself out of one box, putting someone capable in, right? And that's great because the way I built my business, I didn't have that much of a forward thinking. I was the chief cook and bottle washer. I sold we're an equipment manufacturer, as I'd mentioned. So I built the equipment during the day, sold it during the day. I actually built it by night, sold it during the day. Loaded the machines on a pallet, strapped it all down, stuck it on a truck, filled out all the paperwork, went back to building more machines, went back to selling more machines, went to all the trade shows, stood in the booth. And I did it because A, I could, not well, but I could, and B, I bootstrapped the company. I didn't really have anywhere near enough funding. So I thought, well, as long as I can do it, I'm saving payroll, right? But I held on to that. That part's not too unusual, but I held on to that a little too long. And that created rapid problems because I was like a restaurant with 5 tables. I needed the revenue of 20 tables, but I only had 5. And I couldn't grow beyond my own capability. And I hit a ceiling, the business hit a ceiling because it was just me. And then it was a question of who do I bring in? And because I was just doing it all myself, I didn't write any SOPs. I didn't even know what SOP stood for. And when we finally started hiring people, it turned out to be a very tribal factory. I would train someone how to do something just by watching me, and they'd make their own little cheat sheet notes and in their own notebook. And then when they would leave, there goes the notebook, and we'd have to start all over again. And that's a rough way to scale a business. It's if I didn't do it well, I'm training them not to do it well. And the way it works, it's like the old photocopy machines. If you took a copy of a copy of a copy, it degenerated over 5 or 6 generations. It wasn't digital then; it was optical. So a copy of a copy looked worse than the original. And me being maybe 80% of what I needed to be, training someone, they might get 60% of that. And then eventually they'll train someone who might get 40% of that. And I couldn't figure out where the problem was. I'm like, hiring people, but A, I wasn't hiring the right people, and B, they weren't trained properly. And finally, I did bring on someone who's still with us today, who actually runs the company now today, that had a little bit of your mindset when you were working for somebody. He came in originally as a college intern, and then eventually he stayed, and eventually married my daughter. But he decided on his own. We had several departments. We had sales, service, accounting, logistics, purchasing, assembly, etc. And he went in and spent months in each department and mastered it and understood it, and then started writing SOPs for each of those departments. I didn't ask him to do that. He just thought the way I was doing it was a little nuts. And, I think for his own satisfaction and his own job security, he needed to do that. And that's how our company finally got out of me doing everything, right? So I'm very fortunate that that fella came along and had the foresight to do what you did in your earlier career. Looking back,
it's interesting, Mike.
Yeah, sure.
If you don't mind, if I could interrupt real quick,
please.
It's very interesting you say that, because what you just described is what I would say the overwhelming majority of entrepreneurs go through, right? I think that your path and the experience that you had with sort of being in your own way and not having things ready to go, not knowing who to hire and when, and those kinds of questions, I think that's more common than my experience was, to be perfectly frank. And again, I only had that advantage because I sort of made the same mistake in somebody else's company first. But what I would say is that by having your business designed right from the get-go and knowing what that hierarchy is going to look like and what those procedures are going to be, it not only allows you to say, hey, this is our standard operating procedure, that you put part X into box Y or whatever it is.
Sure.
But also why you're making the decisions you make when decisions have to be made. Because once you start building that out, that's where the real power is. Because when you hire people who have the same ethics and values that you do, or similar, nobody's going to be exactly the same, of course, right? If they understand why you've made the decisions you've made, that's how you duplicate yourself. Because there's only one of you, right? So how do you multiply your effectiveness? Well, you multiply your effectiveness by having not just the processes documented, but the thought and decision-making process that goes along with it. And that's where the real power is in motivating and empowering people to then take that energy and just multiply it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that comes with time and perspective. And, if you're lucky enough not to kill your company before that all happens, it's definitely something that has to be learned. That was not intuitive to me. I mean, now I look at it and go, duh, what took you so long, Mike? But in the moment, particularly when the company's young, you're in survival mode. You're not thinking about the future. You're thinking about, today, covering payroll tomorrow, right? And making all these short-term decisions. Looking back, what did you misunderstand most about entrepreneurship before you actually lived it? So looking across the river to the grass on the other side, what'd you get wrong about your view of entrepreneurship?
I think the one thing that stands out to me the most about what I got wrong and where I was severely misguided was the fact that if you just followed what somebody else had done to be successful, similar business model, for example, that you were just going to instantly be successful. If you listen to in my case, it was financial advisors. If you listen to the financial advisor that's standing on the stage and he says, I did this, this, and this, and I was a success, and now I make millions of dollars a year, there's that perception that that's all I have to do, and within 6 months, I'm going to be the rich entrepreneur with all the free time, like right. What you said earlier, right? There's that big misconception. I was so unprepared to face the reality that while there is lots and lots of very good conventional wisdom out there, if you want to have unconventional levels of success, you cannot follow conventional wisdom. You have to use conventional wisdom in unconventional ways.
Yeah, that's really good insight. I think entrepreneurs in general are or tend to be rule breakers, which helps breaking the convention. We tend to draw outside the lines. We tend to respond to every challenge as, well, why not? Mike, we can't do that. Why can't we do that? I don't see a reason why. And we tend to do things that quote unquote can't be done every day, right? Because we just think a little differently and we're wired a little bit differently. I don't know if risk adverse is the right term, but I guess it is because clearly, statistically, 80%, as I mentioned earlier, of all businesses fail. If we're if we're all in on a business and there's a 20% statistical chance of survival, we have to look at it as, well, that's not us. That's everyone else. We're special. At least that's the way my brain was. It's like, yeah, don't confuse me with facts. That doesn't apply to me, which can be dangerous, obviously. But in the earliest days of a business, at least my business, I had to bet the farm over and over and over again. I wish I had gone to Vegas and played the tables because I was on a roll, right? But that's just luck. Yeah, and some of it is, destiny and, you manifest stuff and the way you think and all that. But I'm grateful today that I didn't really realize how many businesses fail and for what reasons. I was ignorant and arrogant and naive. And that probably helped me because at some point my business was more than likely completely insolvent. And I was just too dumb to even realize that. I just kept thinking, well, if I can just get more cash, I can survive another week. And even though it wasn't profitable cash, it's, you do what you got to do. And there was a time when I look back on that and judged myself, like, oh, how stupid was I, Mike? This. I thought I'm smart, and I made a lot of pretty bonehead moves. But those bonehead moves kind of kept the company going long enough for me to get smarter about it, So now I look back and I'm like, oh man, I don't want to do that again, but it worked. I mean, I don't suggest that for people, but we tend to do what we need to do. And if we're lucky, that's where the 80-20 thing comes in. It's like most people run out of that luck before they get wise. You work with business owners who are growing but feel overwhelmed. What are the clearest signs that a business has hit a scaling ceiling?
So the first, the first sign that I would point to is just that feeling that the owner gets. Some of the things that you just described, actually, Mike, just feeling like overwhelmed and not knowing how you're going to get more in the day. Like, you need more revenue, you need more sales, but how are you going to get it? Because there's not enough time to allow it to happen, right? So that feeling of burnout and, I can't do more, but I need more. And that paralytic feeling that goes along with it is one thing that is sort of the first clue to most business owners. The reality is there's other clues way before that. But they don't typically acknowledge it until they get to that level. Because as you said, entrepreneurs, we like to do things ourselves. We always start sort of on our own and having to do more than just lead the company. So we have that habit of like staying in it too long, which we talked about. The next big thing that I see, I should say, not seen, is really just the fact that when you start looking at numbers, right, there's going to be that moment where you're looking at your accounting reports and you're looking at the money in, the money out, profitability, all that stuff. And when you start realizing that, hey, I brought in another, I don't know, $100 million worth of assets or what have you, but I didn't actually make any more money because all my costs went up with it. Because here's the thing, if you're looking at your accounting reports and your costs are scaling up at the same rate or similar rate to the revenues that are coming into the business, you're not scaling your business. You're just inflating it. You're making it bigger. Yeah. And there's a big difference between inflating a business and scaling it. Scaling should give you the exponential power of multiplying value, where inflating is just getting bigger for getting bigger's sake.
Yeah, I've said this on the show many times, so my regular viewers are going to go, oh my God, he's saying it again, but I'll say it again because it's worth it. I used to confuse, I shouldn't even say that. I can't even take credit for knowing the difference between growth and scale. Scale seems to just be a word that is synonymous with growth, but it's not. And I used to think that the solution to every problem we were having, and we had lots of them, was just, if we just grow more, we'll grow out of that problem. And I was really good, probably both a blessing and a curse. I was really good at bringing in more business, not necessarily profitable business, but I could bring in more business. And as a result of that, our business grew rather quickly from just a revenue standpoint. However, what I didn't realize is, as an equipment manufacturer, we sell very expensive, upwards of $100,000 boxes, that we ship out to customers. And for us to increase our revenue by 20%, that involved a significant investment in infrastructure, in logistics, in inventory, in service capability, in staffing. And it's not linear. Our revenue went up 20%, our costs went up 200%, because you're buying the future, right? Eventually, if you stop growing, if you plateau, the money catches up. But as long as you're putting all your emphasis on growth, you will probably go bankrupt profitable. Your profitable company will probably go out of business because you run out of cash. And I think the reason many businesses fail, particularly in the first decade or so, is not because they weren't profitable necessarily, but because they ran out of cash. They were cash starved. And I didn't know how to read a cash flow statement. I barely knew how to read a financial statement in the earliest days. I just looked at the first page of the income statement. I looked at revenue, cost of goods sold, net. And when I saw the word net, I thought net was the end. That's it. I didn't understand a balance sheet. When finally someone started explaining a balance sheet to me, that was the absolute worst thing to ever read, because that was a buzzkill. I wanted to stop at the bottom of the income statement and leave it there. I didn't understand depreciation. I didn't understand all these different things, and short-term debt, long-term debt, all that. It looked like I was profitable from just cost of goods and revenue. Everything looked great, although it wasn't. We were still running out of cash, which had to do with growth and all of that. So I can totally relate to working so hard, feeling so good about the results, and then having that sledgehammer across the face of reality. And, we're worse off now than we were when we were smaller. We were making more money. I was working less hard when we were a smaller company. So I do warn people that rapid growth is a luxury most small businesses can't afford. So at least at the earliest stages. And if I were to do it all over again, I would stay smaller for longer. I would work on systems and SOPs and slowly allow the business to rise, to make sure that we were still in control, that we could still handle it from a technical standpoint and, a production standpoint, and most importantly, a cash flow standpoint. But unless someone's out there giving you a bunch of money as an investor, growth is challenging financially, number one. And then there's a million other things, as you well know. I'm preaching to the choir here. There are a number of things about growth beyond cash that is super challenging. Tell me about your company, Joe. What is the service you provide? What is the mission of your company?
Sure. So really, my company is JP Coaching, and it is a business coaching and executive consulting firm. I don't come in here with a template like a lot of coaches. I'm actually very much the
5 easy steps
coach.
Yeah,
Yeah,
5
the
easy
anti-coach
steps.
coach. No 5 easy steps, right? Because I don't believe for a minute that one size fits all. I will sit there at the conference or the symposium and scoff at the person on stage who says, if you follow these 7 habits, you're going to be the next, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, whatever.
Right.
To me, that doesn't exist. The reality is you have to know your business and why you're in it. And that's what I tell everybody. You have to think about why you started your business. And as you said, Mike, beyond the money, because the reality is money's not a good motivator up front. most businesses do run in the red for quite a while before they actually are profitable and starting to achieve the financial goals. You need something that's going to motivate you beyond that. So what I do is I actually use my proprietary method that I created. It's called Star Scalability Method. And what we do is we sit down with business leaders and business owners and we say, okay, let's realign everything in your business with why you started it. Whether it was time, freedom, flexibility, whatever the values were that made you start it. Maybe you just wanted to do something good for the world. Fine. But we're going to realign all your business goals with that. And that's going to be your strategic vision point. And then I walk them through how to take that energy from the strategic vision and use their team to delegate and move that energy flow forward. And then their assets. So STAR, right? The assets is going to be anything that you own, your proprietary knowledge, tech tools, all that stuff, because assets are multipliers. Kind of like you and I talked about a little bit before. You could bring in every top of the line technology in the world, but if you have a bad process, it's only going to multiply the effects of that bad process.
Sure.
Okay. There's no asset out there, no tech out there that is going to solve a bad process. So you need to really get all that streamlined and make sure it's meeting your goals, again, to multiply that energy. And then the last element of STAR is the rewards. So we sit down and we work with business owners to say, hey, how do we really reward not just you, but everybody on the team and your customers, everybody that's involved? I usually say all stakeholders have to have rewards. And we want to reward the things that move us towards those value-based goals. Now, this again is where I'm a little bit of an outlier. I don't believe in following results the same way everybody else does. I've heard every guru out there say, focus on results, focus on results, focus on results. We are human beings. We get what we focus on. Okay. If we focus on results that are negative, you are going to get more negative results because of what it does to your psyche to focus on that. You will end up taking it out on your team. You will end up making snap decisions that just don't align with your values. So if you work on the rewards that generate the results you want, you're going to find yourself in a much better position. And what I like to tell everybody, Mike, is I have worked with this method for 15 years, okay? And I have never once seen anybody in any business I've worked with who has realigned their goals and their entire business process around their value system that didn't end up making more money and becoming more profitable. So that's really what I help do is I help some come in and sit down with business owners and leaders and say, how do we do this for you in your business? How do we get everything back to the basics? How do we make sure that the foundation is laid before we start building the house we want on top of it?
Yeah, you and I think the same, only it took me a lot longer to figure that out. I've said this again on the show before for the sake of repetition. What I realized a while ago was that if I focused on cash, I'd bring in cash at the expense of something else. If I focused on market share, we'd get more market share at the expense of something else. Someone told me, my business mentor told me, the results of all those things are really, to get the results of all the things that you need results on, it's just a process of making great decisions. Everything will come. Concentrate on making great decisions. Again, not results oriented, just great decisions. And I embraced that, and it was wildly successful up until the point when I had a meeting with my banker. We have a line of credit, and once a year they have to physically walk into your building, see the brick and mortar, shake hands with a human, proof of life, and they have this form they have to fill out, and it'll check boxes and fill in the blanks. And of course, he asked, what's your revenue target for next year? And I said, we don't have one. And he goes, I'm sorry, what? I said, no, we don't have one. He goes, there's no place on this form, there's no checkbox that says customer doesn't have one, right? It's usually like 10%, 20%, 30%, 100%, a line to fill something in the middle. I'm like, no, we don't have one. And he put his pen down and he just looked at me and I thought, uh-oh. I said, Mike said too much. And I said, but let me explain. And I explained what I just said, that, I believe that revenue and all the different KPIs that we look at are the results of good decisions. So our goal this year is to make the best decisions we possibly can. And we'll know if we made the right decisions based on the return that we get, based on revenue, based on profit, based on market share, based on customer satisfaction, based on all these key metrics. And if he goes, well, what happens if it doesn't give you a good return? I said, then we adjust our practices. Obviously, we weren't making the best decisions. So we'll pivot, we'll realign, and we'll ready aim and fire again. And until we get results that are suitable. And then we'll tweak it to try and get the results even better. But we're not focusing on the result. When I was younger, I got my pilot's license. And every pilot, when they're training, whether you're flying for Delta or a little Cessna 172 as I flew, it's drummed into them by their instructor. During every second you're in that airplane in command, every second you have to do three things simultaneously, no exceptions: aviate, navigate, and communicate. And one of my ghoulish guilty pleasures is I like reading NTSB crash reports for civilian airliners, because I spend a lot of my time on airplanes. So I kind of like to know why things went wrong. And in almost every case, not every, but the great majority of all the cases, it had to do with the fact that the flight crew stopped doing one of those three things. They were so concentrated on figuring out why they didn't get three green lights when they lowered their landing gear, which means one of the gear didn't lock, or the light's out, one of the two. And this is a real case history. They spent so much time trying to troubleshoot why they didn't have three greens that it was nighttime. It was a new moon, so there was like no visibility on the ground. They were over a swamp in Florida. It was an Eastern Airlines flight, so it went back a long time. And they flew the plane into the swamp. By the time they got the pull up, pull up notice, it was too late. They hit the ground. And that was a case of the pilots, the all three pilots back then, the captain, the first officer, and the flight engineer were so busy diagnosing a problem, they stopped aviating. Mm-hmm. And there are all sorts of examples like that. And I think in business, there is an equivalent to aviate, navigate, communicate in business, that we can't focus on one thing. Sometimes you have to put a little more focus on one thing, but you can't focus on one really, really super critical thing at the expense of other things that may seem less critical, because that'll come back to bite you. Does that resonate with you at all? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And your example is perfect with that, really, because again, if you're focusing on one thing that is a result, like even with airlines, like if you're focused only on the destination you have to get to, you're not going to, do all the steps that you have to do to get there.
Sure.
Right. And you're going to lose track of some of those different things. You're not going to communicate. You're not going to navigate, so on and so forth. Right. And it's true with your business too. And that's why if you keep it value-based, it's going to motivate you, for one thing, if it's aligned to a deeper meaning. But two, it's going to help you stay focused, because as you said, when the problems come, not even if, when problems come up, it's really hard for us as entrepreneurs to, the old adage, you got to see the forest through the trees kind of thing. It's really easy for us to only look at what's right in front of us and focus on that instead of the bigger picture. I mean, your example, it's easier to focus on the green light not working, and that's our natural tendency, than it is to focus on, hey, wait a minute, or we're about to crash into a swamp.
Right.
Yeah.
Why does founder dependency become such a serious risk as a business grows?
Well, what happens when your business doesn't have you? And that's what I always say to everybody is, can your business survive without you? So founder dependency becomes a big issue for a lot of reasons. One, it means that you as a founder can't even take a vacation without having to either worry or be on the phone or the email, all these things, right? And I've never met a single person who started a business that never wanted to have a day off in the rest of their life. That just doesn't seem to work, right? Everybody wants to have that time and needs that moment. So that's one thing right there. The second part is founder dependency is actually really damaging to team culture, because when you have a team, when you start hiring staff and your company's growing and you're getting more and more people, some people, yes, they want to come in and do the same job for 40 years. That's fine. But the majority of people want something to move onward and upwards to.
Right.
And if everything is dependent on the founder, there's no opportunity for them to grow. So what's going to happen? They're going to get bored and they're going to go look for that opportunity with somebody else's firm. So now you're losing the intelligence that you have there, the intellectual property risks, obviously, competitive risks, all those things depending on the business we're in. But also now you got all the costs of recruiting again, training again, all that other stuff. And then the third thing that is really big for a lot of companies is if the company is dependent on you as the founder and you're making every decision, you hold all the knowledge, how do you ever sell that company for what it's worth?
I was just going to go down that road. Yeah.
That's the one thing I say to people all the time is, if your business can't survive 2 weeks without you, without your staff calling you, how do you honestly expect to ever sell this business? Or what if, heaven forbid, it's not a sales thing? What if your business exit is not on your terms? What if there's a medical issue? What if there's, people die, right? Well, now if something happens to you, the business is fully dependent on you. What happens to your family? You think you're leaving a multi-million-dollar business behind that's really not worth anything. How many of us can sleep at night thinking that we've just left our spouses, kids, etc., with a pile of debt on that balance sheet instead of a pile of assets?
Yeah. Yeah. Unless you can run a company from the grave, which I'm not convinced anyone can do. It's hard enough to run. It's hard enough to run it from this side of the dirt. The other side, I think, would be even harder. Delegation is a constant struggle for founders. It certainly was for me. In your experience, what's the real barrier? Is it systems, people, mindset, all of the above, other things?
I think it's a blend of all the above that sort of comes all back to mindset, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of founders are convinced that they can't delegate certain decisions or authority for certain decisions, I should say. And in reality, it's just that lack of trust, because they had so much on the line for so many years building their company that it's really scary to give that up, right? Like if you've built your company from zero to a relatively respectable, steady level of revenue and profitability, the idea of handing that decision over is terrifying. It is for a lot of people, right? Because you can't help but think if they don't make the decision I would make, there's a risk to the company. That's why I said earlier, and I want to reiterate, it's important to document not just your processes and procedures. It's important to document your decision-making and why you make the decisions you do. Because when you document a decision-making authority, then you can rest assured that if someone else is, relatively intelligent and follows your decision tree, then you're going to be able to delegate a lot more effectively. The other component of that is, you have to accept the fact that nobody's going to be an exact copy of you.
Right.
Okay. Even with the decision-making formally outlined and the processes and everything, you're probably only going to get the exact same decision, maybe 80% of the time. But there is sort of, the cost of doing business. Would you rather have an alternative decision being made a small percentage of the time and be able to breathe and enjoy your business? Or do you want to be involved in everything, have a business that can't be sold, and never have a day off again? And that's really the choice it comes down to.
Yeah, I know in my case, when my team started taking on more responsibility, they would, we're in a high-tech world, so they would come up with an idea that I've tried already and was convinced that that's not going to work. And at first I would say that. which is the most demoralizing thing. They're all excited. They have this idea. They're presenting it to me. And, halfway through, I wouldn't even let them finish. I'd go, tried that in 1986. It doesn't work, whatever,
Yeah.
which is awful. I got to the point where I would just keep that inside. And I would say, wow, that's interesting. I thought about that. Yeah, I mean, tell me more. And several times, Joe, I was wrong. I tried it a different way, or technology changed since the last time I tried it. And I just kind of discounted it. And then I realized when I was growing the company, I was so naive, everything was possible. And including things that none of our competitors thought was possible. I was just too naive and ignorant to know it can't be done. So I did it. I found a way to do it. And that kind of naivety, fresh eyes is a good thing. And they were right more than they were wrong. And I'm convinced that even the stuff they were wrong was only wrong for the moment. It might not be wrong in 5 years or next year or tomorrow. And the joy that I could see on their faces when they came up with an idea, I knew better, but I let them run with it, gave them encouragement. And it was a success. I love seeing that. Now, I don't think I've ever gone back and said, hey, by the way, I tried this before and it didn't work. I don't think I was quite ready to admit that. But it's we all talk about having to get out of our own way, but sometimes we have to get out of the way of our staff to let them do things. And I'm totally there.
Yeah. Actually, Mike, do you mind if I just jump in real quick on that?
Please.
You said something very pointed. Your example was great. What didn't work in whether it was 86 or 2002 or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we're in the same environment in 2026, right?
That's right.
Everything's changed. I think we all acknowledge that. The flip side of that is, and this is one thing that I see a lot of founders get tripped up on, is they assume that things haven't changed from the way they used to do it. So, quick example, and I was guilty of this once in my life. I was sitting there at a firm I was with one time, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisory firm. And I was like, why can the staff not get through new account setup within the X amount of minutes that I used to do it, right? Well, the reality is I had moved on from my career quite a bit. The last time I did a new account form, they were 2 pages long and a 1-page disclosure, and you set everything up in the system, it was done, right?
Yeah.
It was easy to do it in 5-10 minutes. My staff was taking like 30 and I couldn't figure it out, right? What happened is also over time, because of all the things that have happened in the world, 9/11 and the great financial crisis, all these spurred on so many new regulations. The new account form process now is like 70 pages. So I had nostalgia telling me, oh, you should be able to do it with this error rate in this number of minutes. But in reality, that just didn't fit anymore. And that's the one thing I would say to every founder is that nostalgia can be a dirty little liar convincing you things were either easier or better than they actually were. So when you find that disconnect where you're saying to yourself, why can't my company or my staff do X, Y, and Z the way I'm expecting them to? Don't think back to the way you used to do it, because odds are it's probably been years since you did it that way or with different systems. So don't let nostalgia be your own worst enemy.
Yeah, it's funny. Some friends of mine will say, oh, I wish we lived back in the 50s. The 50s was a simpler time. And I'm sure back in the 50s, people then were saying, oh, I wish we could live back in the 30s. It was a simpler time. And, probably in, 11 AD, someone said, oh, 7 AD was the better, well, they wouldn't say AD then, but 7 was the better year. I think you're right. I think nostalgia is a very filtered look at history where all the bad kind of minimizes and all the good expands in our memory. And, that's why we have theme parties from 30 years ago, and every generation did, right? Right now we think it's cool to, I used to go to like a 60s party or a 70s disco party or something like that. What's funny now is the young people are going to 2010 parties. I'm like, I can't tell the difference between 2010 and 2026. To me, it seems the same, but there's a difference, I guess. When you start working with a new client, what's the first shift you try to create in how they view their role in business?
Oh, definitely the shift from the operator mindset to the architect.
I like to say
I
in
don't
business,
want,
shift happens.
yes,
I have
it
to
does.
enunciate carefully on that one, but shift happens. If it doesn't
Yes,
happen, you're part of the 80% that fail if you don't
that's
shift.
exactly right. And so that mindset shift is the biggest thing, because honestly, it's one of the hardest things too for most people, because again, you've worked so hard to build something and you get nostalgia telling you that you've done it great and they're the only one that can do it. So trying to design a system that allows other people to do it in your place with you overseeing it instead of you actually doing it is the hardest mindset shift for most people.
Well, the common phrase that you hear in all business circles is work on your business, not in your business, right? And
Mhm.
uh, which is much easier said than done.
It
For
is.
the entrepreneur listening who feels burned out or stuck, what's one practical step they can take right now to start building a business that doesn't depend entirely on them?
The first thing that they can do, and then the one thing that everybody should do, is sit down and do what I call a personal values audit. And sit down and ask yourself, why did I start my business? What were my motivating factors to starting my business? And again, try to stay away from the dollars. Your dollar goals are a result. They're not a goal that's going to motivate you. They're a result. Think about the things that, were you passionate about the business that you're in and you wanted to be able to be in it full time? Were you trying to do it to set up some legacy for your family? Were you trying to do it for time or flexibility, whatever the case may be? But sit down and say to yourself, why did I start this business? And really sit down and go through all those emotionals and ask yourself, is that still happening? Look at now where you are today and say, what's happening every day when I go into the work in my business and I flip on the lights? What are the things that I do that are supporting those values that I set out to do this business for? And what are the things that don't support those values? Things that aren't supporting those values are either unnecessary or need to be delegated. That's the first thing right there.
That's great advice.
And it's actually something I do with my own businesses. I tell all my clients that choose to work with me, you got to do this at least quarterly, because a lot of people have a hard time to do it.
Yeah.
It's not always fun to sit down and do the touchy feely emotional stuff. But honestly, for my businesses, I sit down and do it the first Monday of every month. I
Wow.
actually do it monthly in my own business.
Oh, that's great. So,
Yeah.
last question. We're about out of time. How did
Yeah.
you define success when you first started your first company, and how do you define it today?
Oh, so first started the first company, I made the same mistake that so many people do. I said, I want to make X number of dollars a year within the first year. And I was miserable. I hated it. And I didn't even give it a full year before I walked away from it.
Did you
Now,
accomplish the goal and hate it, or did you not accomplish the goal?
no,
No,
didn't even
no.
accomplish the goal. I said, you know what? This is not for me. I walked away, came back and started another company in that same industry later with different purposes. But it goes back to the values. So how do you measure success? I'll give you a quick example. One of the financial practices I started because I needed flexibility and I couldn't get that working for somebody 40 hours a week. My mother had just been diagnosed with cancer. We knew the
Mm.
prognosis was not good and she was going to need support. So I said, well, I'm valuing time with her over a 40-hour a week paycheck. So I said, I'm going to start this business because I know I can do it on less than 40 hours. And the goal was to give me flexibility and keep my licensing active.
Mm.
Okay. I obviously, I knew I had to meet certain minimum numbers to keep everything going,
Sure.
but money was never the factor. Right. And the goal was when she was no longer with us to just walk away from the business. I didn't even care about selling it because I didn't think it would be worth anything.
Mm.
But I built that entire business, that entire practice around making sure that things were as automated and efficient as possible. As much as possible, I had other things delegated out so I didn't have to deal with them so that I could be with her instead of with my business. The result of that was I accomplished that goal. I was able to be there for every doctor's appointment,
Wow.
do all the running around, all that stuff. I was there at the hospital and I needed to be for 3 years.
Wow.
And then at the end of that 3 years, I took one look at the business and said, I really don't want this anymore. And I went, holy moly, I've actually got a business that's running itself. It's worth significantly more money than I ever thought it would be worth. And so I called a business broker, and the short version of the story is I ended up selling this business for a significant amount of money. And that was never the intent. But I based the entire business around my values that were the purpose for starting it. And the result was more financial success than I ever thought possible.
You made good decisions. You had a vision-based goal, a value-based goal, and the business gods rewarded you for that.
That's right.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's an amazing story. And obviously your mother would be very proud of that. I'm sure.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah. Joe, thank you so much. We are out of time. So thank you so much for being my guest today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I am blessed to be the host of the show where I get to talk to other entrepreneurs. We all think our story occurred in a vacuum and our journey was harder than any other entrepreneur's journey. And then when I start and viewers and listeners see the show and hear the show and hear very similar stories coming from all different types of businesses, from all different types of people, with all different types of backgrounds, there's a common denominator. I think that entrepreneurship is a curriculum. We all are in this PhD training course, only there's no fraternities or sorority girls, and there's no campus. And there doesn't seem to be a graduation date. It's a perpetual learning experience. But looking back with some altitude and perspective, I totally appreciate that now. I don't think I did in the moment. In the moment, I was too distracted with just staying in business and, eating, basic things like that. But now I look back and I'm like, I'm grateful, ironically, for all of the trauma and drama and stress and, sleepless nights and all of that, because I think each one of those outcomes, positive or negative, are positive change agents toward mastery. And if it doesn't kill you, if it doesn't kill your business, and if you learn and open yourself up to learning from your mistakes and embracing those mistakes as change agents, it makes the PhD course we're on a little bit easier. And so thank you for sharing that. Thank you for de-romanticizing entrepreneurship. It's nice to talk to someone, it's refreshing to talk to someone who is clearly successful, who had the same rough start as, everyone else. So thanks for sharing all that with me and my audience. And for my audience who'd like to get more information on Joe's company, if you're watching this on YouTube, look down here where it says see more, and Joe's information, his company information, the URL, and all that will be right there. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, of course, when it's safe to do so, don't do it while you're driving. I'd like to keep my audience. Then look at the show notes in your favorite podcast app, and that information will be there as well. Joe, thank you so much for being my guest. You're amazing, and your story is amazing and inspirational, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It was a great time to share, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Before I wrap up, here's a few final thoughts. Building a business isn't just about growth, it's about sustainability, not just for the company, but for the person behind it. One of the most important ideas from this conversation is that when a business can't function without its owner, growth becomes fragile. Long hours, constant decision-making, and burnout aren't signs of commitment. They're signals that the business needs structure, clarity, and leadership evolution. Joe's perspective is a reminder that scaling isn't about doing more. It's about doing the right things differently, building teams you trust, systems that work without constant oversight, and a business that supports the life you set out to build in the first place. If this conversation resonated with you, take a moment to step back and ask yourself, what would I have to change for my business to run well without me being involved in everything? That question alone can reshape how you think about growth. Now, that's a wrap. Thanks for being part of our Reluctant Entrepreneur family. We've been very busy recording future episodes with fascinating guests, so be sure to subscribe to get notified when new episodes drop. And one favor, if you're watching this on YouTube, consider giving us a like and subscribe. Those two simple clicks really help us expand our reach. If you're an entrepreneur or know someone who would make a great guest, I'd love to hear from you. Visit reluctantentrepreneur.podcast.com to apply or recommend a guest. You can also reach me directly at mike@reluctantentrepreneur.podcast.com. And of course, a shameless plug, if you're interested in my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable, it's available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon and as an audiobook on both Audible and Amazon. Thanks again for listening or watching. Until next time, be unstoppable. I'll see you again soon.